In 1891, work crews digging beneath downtown Seattle did not strike bedrock. They struck storefronts, basement signs, entire streets sealed under 22 feet of earth. One excavation even pulled an 8-carat gold chain from solid rock, as if the ground had swallowed a city whole. Newspapers ran the accounts, but no one could explain how an older Seattle had ended up entombed beneath one of America's fastest-growing cities, completely erased from living memory. The real mystery was never what lay underground. It was who put it there. As steam shovels and labor crews tore into the glacial clay of downtown Seattle, the work quickly deviated from standard municipal construction. Men wielding picks and shovels expected to hit clay, gravel, or solid stone. Instead, their steel tools struck brick. In the mid-1890s and the early 1900s, as the city began its massive grading campaigns, excavation crews started uncovering structural obstacles deep beneath the modern street surface. These were not scattered fragments of discarded lumber or random debris. Laborers uncovered intact, upright brick walls, stone staircases descending into the damp darkness, and heavy timber doors still locked from the inside. Contractor journals from the era, including the field logs of the Hopkirk Company, document these eerie encounters with a phantom terrain. While clearing earth along the city's central corridors, workers exposed 12-inch wooden stave drainage pipes, completely intact, running parallel to their new digs. In other spots, high-pressure water hoses used to wash away the hills accidentally flushed out brick-lined well shafts and heavy iron pump heads that had been swallowed by the dirt years prior. The physical evidence began surfacing in plain sight. Archival photographs captured the sheer scale of the disruption, laborers standing next to the exposed vertical faces of buried buildings. Onlookers gathered at the edges of massive pits, watching steam shovels scrape away 20 feet of earth to reveal hand-painted wooden signs still fixed to storefronts. One intact sign reading J.H. Brown Drapery clung to a brick facade far below the modern sidewalk, as if waiting for customers who would never arrive. During one excavation, workers uncovered a buried cellar door with a tin plate sign for E.C. Smith & Company. The digging halted as the crew foreman and the city engineer examined the structure, deciding whether to clear it or seal it forever. Similar encounters happened block after block, confirming that this was not an isolated ruin, but an entire buried street grid. Local newspapers quickly seized on the spectacle, turning the muddy construction zones into a public sensation. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer and the Seattle Times ran regular updates on the strange relics emerging from the muck. Reports detailed the recovery of glass bottles, household ceramic shards, and even a fully preserved, rusted horse-drawn carriage pulled from a subterranean void. For the workers, the experience was unsettling. Laborers described a strange shudder in the ground when heavy machinery broke through into hollow, empty spaces. These were the intact basements and first-floor commercial spaces of a lost city. It became clear to the people of Seattle that they were not merely building a city, they were actively walking on top of one. The streets they used every day were suspended over a dark, silent labyrinth, a fully structured subterranean urban grid that had been sealed away, waiting to be uncovered. The physical elevation of Seattle's streets by up to 22 feet did not happen in a vacuum. For the business owners and families occupying the brick and wood structures of Pioneer Square, the rising tide of dirt and masonry was a slow-motion disaster. Front doors that once opened onto bustling sidewalks were suddenly facing raw vertical walls of earth. City directories from the era trace this quiet displacement with bureaucratic precision. In 1890, the directory listed A.K. Miller's grocery store at 124 Pike Street as a thriving ground-floor business. By 1903, the directory entry for that exact address carried a stark new designation: basement. Next door, dry goods merchant L.B. Carter watched his first-floor retail space completely disappear beneath the new street level. He eventually filed suit against the city for stripping away his entryways and ruining his trade. At the corner of Yesler and Main, Eleanor Hayes was forced to abandon the ground floor of her millinery shop entirely. The new wooden sidewalks were constructed several feet above her original lintel, leaving her with no choice but to relocate her entire inventory to the second story, turning her former main floor into a dark, inaccessible vault. For residential property owners, the physical reality was equally chaotic. Some homes were left stranded high above the new thoroughfares, on tall columns of clay known as spite mounds. Residents had to climb fragile wooden ladders or steep temporary steps just to reach their front doors from the newly established street level. Municipal tax ledgers from 1901 recorded sharp drops in property assessments along these corridors, a quiet official acknowledgement that the city's progress had dismantled the daily lives of the citizens who built it. The underground was not an engineered marvel to those who lived through it. It was a map of ruined livelihoods. On June 6, 1889, a cabinet maker's glue pot boiled over in a basement shop on Front Street, starting a fire that consumed 31 blocks of Seattle's business district in less than half a day. When the smoke cleared, the young city faced an immediate crisis. Rather than simply clearing away the charred wood and rebuilding the same fragile timber structures, local leaders mandated that all new construction must be built with brick and stone. But the physical ground beneath their feet presented a far more stubborn obstacle than fire. Seattle was built on an uneven terrain where steep clay hills dropped sharply into low-lying saltwater tidal flats. The city was essentially a muddy shelf pinned between a high ridge and the salt water. At high tide, the waters of Elliott Bay routinely backed up into the crude wooden sewer pipes of Pioneer Square, reversing the flow of waste and flooding the muddy streets with seawater and sewage. Horses sank to their shoulders in the thick muck of the main thoroughfares, and pedestrians risked slipping into the unstable mire during heavy winter rains. The city was growing too fast to tolerate these conditions, turning drainage into a severe planning crisis. The ground itself forced the hands of municipal planners. It was no longer a minor inconvenience, but a structural barrier to commerce. To solve the plumbing issues, protect the new masonry buildings, and allow railway networks to operate on a level grade, engineers realized they could not build on the existing saturated soil. They had to raise the entire valley. What began as an attempt to recover from a natural disaster evolved into a systematic campaign to fill the lowlands and shave down the hills. By choosing to establish a uniform, elevated grade, Seattle ceased adapting to its natural geography and began violently reshaping it, ensuring that the original streets would eventually be swallowed by the rising tide of progress. This subterranean world is not a myth or a vague local legend. It occupies a precise geographic footprint pinned directly to the earth beneath modern Seattle's busiest historic district. The central stage for this buried grid is Pioneer Square, a neighborhood defined by specific named blocks that once sat entirely at a lower elevation. To reconstruct the original layout, historians rely on the Sanborn fire insurance maps from 1884 and 1890. These highly detailed, color-coded street guides were drafted long before the Great Burial. They reveal a bustling commercial waterfront where Front Street, known today as First Avenue, ran parallel to the saltwater tide flats. On these archival maps, Front Street is lined with closely packed ground-floor brick stores, hotels, and saloons, all sitting flush with the original dirt roadway. Further south, Yesler Way and Jackson Street define the southern boundaries of this low-lying zone. At the intersection of Yesler and Front Street, the original ground sat barely above the high tide line of Elliott Bay, vulnerable to every storm. Period photographs confirm what the Sanborn maps outline: ordinary surface streets where horse-drawn wagons rattled past active storefronts, their entrance doors level with the wooden sidewalks. By comparing these early maps with the revised Sanborn sheets of 1905 and 1915, the physical shift becomes undeniable. The newer plates mark these exact same blocks with a distinct technical note: fill. They document where the new, elevated street lines were constructed directly on top of the old ones, trapping the original sidewalks in perpetual darkness. Every subterranean passage, brick archway, and abandoned basement entrance has a documented location. This hidden network of corridors corresponds perfectly to real, historical addresses. The underground was not a mysterious or accidental void. It was simply the city's original ground floor, paved over and left behind. The Seattle City Council drove the burial of the original street level through deliberate recorded municipal decisions. On June 8, 1876, the council set the legal precedent by passing Ordinance 112, which established the council's authority to alter the city's physical grade at the expense of local property owners. By the 1890s, this bureaucratic framework became the blueprint for reshaping the entire waterfront. Official council minutes and engineering reports from the era frame these massive earth-moving campaigns around public safety and sanitation and street access. The city engineer, J.R. Miller, argued that raising the street level was the only permanent solution to Seattle's chronic infrastructure failures. The official records use technical terms like uniform grade consistency and sanitary correction. In plain terms, it meant the street level had to rise to prevent seawater from forcing raw sewage back into businesses during high tide. The City Council turned these engineering reports into municipal law, funding the regrade projects through public bonds to prioritize overall commercial growth. Leaders recorded the burial of Old Seattle as a practical civic solution, transforming a chaotic tidal flat into a level, functional urban center. In October 1890, as Seattle's leadership pushed to expand its grading powers, city engineer J.R. Miller stepped forward to shape the policy. While the City Council wanted broad, unchecked authority to reshape the streets, Miller's technical memoranda urged caution. He warned that expanding the city's grading powers too quickly would expose the municipality to unmanageable legal and financial liabilities. This friction between political ambition and engineering reality forced the city to refine its legal framework, turning broad civic goals into tightly drafted, executable policy. The administrative precedent was already in place. Since the passage of Ordinance 112 in 1876, which compelled property owners to fund the grading of Front Street, the city had the legal power to rewrite its geography. But Miller's calculations translated that power into physical action. He analyzed the steep topography and the glacial clay of the surrounding hills, confirming they were structurally suited for hydraulic monitor water sluicing. Through Miller's official reports, the abstract idea of raising Seattle's streets became a highly calculated, mechanical plan. He established the precise grading lines, the drainage slopes, and the logistical steps needed to execute the work. With the policy finalized and the engineering plans approved, the bureaucratic debate ended. The decisions were locked in, and the city was ready to push these plans from paper onto the raw earth of the streets. Seattle chose not to expand outward into the surrounding wilderness. Instead, the city built directly on top of itself. Giant steam shovels tore into the clay hills, while massive hydraulic monitors blasted Denny Hill with up to 20 million gallons of water a day, washing entire landscapes of soil down into the low-lying streets. This massive movement of earth raised the city's surface by as much as 22 feet in several key areas. Labourers constructed massive retaining walls along the new elevated street lines, sealing off the original storefronts. They filled the gaps between these walls with millions of cubic yards of loose dirt, glacial till, and rock slurry. As this thick deluge of earth settled, it permanently sealed the older layer of the city in place. The original wooden sidewalks, the stone-paved thoroughfares, and the first-floor entryways of hundreds of buildings disappeared beneath the rising artificial ground. The city chose to entomb the old street level rather than demolish it. The surface became a ceiling, transforming active, sunlit storefronts into dark, subterranean vaults. The city above continued to grow, paved with new concrete and masonry, while the original streets were left frozen in the damp, silent dark below. What remained beneath the newly paved avenues was not a ruin in the traditional sense, but a perfectly preserved urban snapshot. By choosing to fill the gaps between the retaining walls rather than clear the ground, Seattle's engineers transformed a crude municipal planning solution into an unintended historical archive. The old storefronts, intact brickwork, and abandoned sidewalks were not destroyed, they were trapped. Every brick archway and sealed doorway became a structural boundary between two distinct eras, frozen in the cold, damp dark. This massive mechanical elevation did more than solve a plumbing crisis. It physically layered the city's timeline, stacking the 20th century directly on top of the 19th. The labourers and engineers who washed away the hills had built a second, invisible Seattle, a silent monument to a past that was covered up but never truly erased. The old city did not vanish. It was simply bypassed, left to wait beneath the feet of an oblivious public, turning the ground itself into a physical record of the city's urgent race toward the future. Today, millions walk these paved avenues, oblivious to the hollow world preserved just inches beneath their feet. We continuously build our future on the buried ruins of our past, deciding what to remember and what to discard. But history cannot be fully erased. It simply waits in the dark. What secrets are buried beneath your city? Let us know below.